Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, September the 1st in the Memorial Arena in Victoria, BC. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes this program happen every week. We're going to start by we're going to be talking about the election. I picked up an email from the Huntington Post, and to me, this is an issue that this election should be about, but somehow it doesn't get mentioned. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs, and then we'll go into it. It says, why is the resource-rich Canadian government always poor? Canada's the second largest country in the world. It has plentiful natural resources and a relatively small population of 35 million. Yet our governments are always short of money. Education has to be cut, healthcare is deliberately being destroyed, eligibility for old age security is postponed from 65 to 67, Canada Post cannot afford to deliver mail to our homes, and I'll add to the story that the homeless and poor are everywhere in Canada. And to me, that is something that should be a major issue in this election. So the first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack Show. Walter's out of town, so it's the Mehdi and Jack Show with Mehdi Najari. And Mehdi, I think, is going to be making the point that here in our viewing area of the CRD, the Greens have a real opportunity to win some seats. And I think we're going to be talking about why you should consider voting Green. And I'd like to mention, what I've been reading here about the poor Canadian governments. That's true when we have provincial NDP governments as well. They toe the same corporate line. So we're going to be talking about why you should consider voting outside of the three main parties, Conservative, Liberal, and NDP. In my opinion, those parties are all kind of the same. And so, Mehdi, let's talk about why vote Green.
Before we tell you why we should vote Green, I think we should talk about other issues, and then maybe the choice become clearer. I thought right now what's happening with the election, the media and the Harper and the parties that are engaged looks like they like to talk only about the economy and also security. And I think if we stick to that agenda, Harper agenda, Harper will win again this election. The most important way to go after Harper is to talk about what he has done in last 10 years as a prime minister. And the corruption has been astronomical. And not many people know about Harper corruption. What he has done to our Canada, and how he corrupt, his decision-making were mostly corrupt. For example, here is headline: ex-minister manipulated contract for federal real estate sell-off. And companies got federal contract after attending far-flung Tory fundraiser. Conservative MP Mark Adler invited lobbyists to fundraiser. Man weighing for broadcast license urged to donate to Tory fundraiser. So it has been, they use their position as a federal government to fundraise for their own party and their own agenda. Let me give you some example that we can talk about. We had the G8 and G20 meeting in 2010 in Ontario, in Toronto. The government of Canada spent $858 million for those 3 days meeting. Everybody was shocked because the year before, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it cost $19 million for security.
Harper government spent an extra $800 million on security that nobody else had to spend. And it's a really good question about where did that money go?
And it's become a slush fund. They have many contracts given to their friends for renting cars or for bug spray and fake lake and so on and so forth. Mr. Tony Clements spent $50 million in his own constituency under the guise of G8, G20 in places that have nothing to do with the meeting. So this is corruption. Anywhere else, you call it corruption. The Auditor General look at this, and its report came just before the election of 2011. NDP and Conservative prevented to become public until after the election. So during the election, people could not talk about the corruption of Harper government. There was another case, Lac Megantic. The train were derailed and killed 47 Canadians. Why that happened? That happened because of the deregulation agenda of the Harper government. Harper government decided to allow corporations to look after the inspection and safety of the trains. And so what did happen? They allow the companies to inspect their own rails instead of the federal government do that. They allow the company, instead of having at least 2 conductors in the train, they reduce that to 1 conductor in order to make more profit, more money for the corporations. They also allow the companies make, for example, 1 conductor work for 10 hours. They just give him 4 hours of rest and another 10 hours. So the conductors that working in the whole train with 1 conductor, they were super tired. They were exhausted.
And it sounds like the Harper government was allowing the industry to write their own regulations so as they could make as much money as possible, and to hell with safety. And it ended up with Lac Megantic.
That's exactly. There was an audit in 2011 for that. Not implementing Auditor General audit recommendation in 2011 and lying about it, that the Auditor General gave them more time to implement it. At the time of 2011 audit, the former Environment Commission, Scott Vaughan, noted that the problems were not new and had been identified in internal audit 5 years earlier in 2006. So from 2006 until 2013, when the accident happened, the federal government did not do anything about the warning about the safety, endangering the public life.
And of course they're doing that because the whole agenda of the Harper government, and I believe every government in Canada, is to maximize corporate profit. They work for the corporations, and it ended up with 47 people, very innocent people, just getting murdered, and nobody's ever paid a price for that.
And besides that, they
Nobody's
allow
been
the
held
corporations to increase the speed of the train,
Right.
another way to make more profit. And besides all of those, between 2009 and 2013, there were 28,000% increase in the oil shipment by the rail. And the type of oil they shipped were very volatile. These trains were called bomb train. You know, that if the accident happened, they would explode in a tremendous fire. 47 people died. Nobody is responsible. Nobody in this government is accountable.
Or in the industry.
And they got away with it.
Yes.
They turned our country to a banana republic. The same, you talk about why we are poor. Because the government of Harper in last 10 years gave more than $60 billion a year tax cut to the corporations. They removed $60 billion a year from public treasury and gave it to corporations. And their excuse was that if we give corporation tax cut, they will spend that money in the economy and stimulate the economy. Today, in the economic report, one of the issues that they raised that the corporations, industry, are not spending money, investing money in the economy.
Why the hell would they?
They are just accumulating them.
Yes,
So
of
all
course.
those tax cuts and all the lies, excuses that they gave about it was totally wrong. We have an issue of tax evasion and tax avoidance. And that is about $80 billion estimated, $80 billion a year we are not getting in the public treasury. Maybe about $10 billion a year of that money is being stashed outside the country. And when the data came, the huge revelation of data about the names of the people from different Western countries that are stashing money in Cook Island and other tax haven, the government Canada have done nothing about it. Nothing.
Okay. Now, I agree with you, but I would say it wouldn't matter if Harper was the prime minister or the Liberals were the prime minister, or were the government, or the NDP were the government. I don't think it's going to matter because they all work for the same corporate interests.
During this election, we see none of them talk about this matter, the matter of tax evasion and what they are going to do about it. Because if it is $80 billion can come back to the coffers of the country, then they cannot say we don't have money for education. We don't have money for other public services. The next thing I want to talk about is listeria, the scandal of listeria.
Okay.
In 2008.
So listeria is a bacterial infection in meat products,
Yes.
and it flared up several years ago, and a lot of people were killed and sickened.
And what's happened, the background information. By November of 2007, there was a lots of lobbying by the industry. They were lobbying the government of Canada to let them inspect their own operations and the process of meat packing.
So the meat packing companies would do their own inspections,
Yes.
just like the train companies.
Just like train company and many others,
Yes.
many other industries. So by March 31st, they start implementing, March 31st, 2008, they start implementing and allowing the corporations to inspect their own meat processing plant. And also they took the federal inspectors out of the plants. You know, until now the federal inspector could go to the line in the plant and inspect, and they have a lots of leeway and power to inspect whatever they want and put order of a stoppage if they see a problem. But by changing the inspection method to giving it to the industry, the government inspectors sit in their offices just reviewing and auditing the inspection report that the industry sent them. That started in March of 2008, March 31st, 2008. By June 2nd, the problem of listeriosis started. Between June 2nd until middle of the August, they didn't know where is it coming from. And they delay action. By middle of the August, they knew it's coming from Maple Leaf Meatpacking in Toronto. At the height of the issue was late August, and 21 people, at least 21 people died from listeriosis. Where is the Minister of Health? Mr. Tony Clements was Minister of Health of Harper government. He wasn't in the country. In August 26, 27, he was in Denver, Colorado. What was he doing in Denver, Colorado? It was the Democratic Convention, National Democratic Convention, when they selected Barack Obama to be their candidate for 2008 election. He was there lobbying, not for the health care and health of the Canadian. He was lobbying on the side of the oil industry for tar sand development. This is criminal. You know, people are dying, and Minister of Health is lobbying for tar sand industry, for dirty oil.
Yeah.
Nobody was prosecuted.
And you know, I remember in that case, the media made the hero out to be the president of Maple Leaf Foods.
Yes.
The very the head of one of the major players in the industry that I guess had lobbied to change the rules. And now, really, I remember very clearly the media portrayed him as the great hero in this.
And
It's murder.
21 people, mostly senior citizens, in the nursing home. They had sandwiches. Most of the problem was in cold cut. It's very understandable. The industry increased the speed of production and does not want to do cleanup. Proper cleanup take time and doesn't want to do the cleanup. The bacterial growth start in the machine, in the cutting the meat, and cause the problem. But the issue is this. Do we live in a democratic society? Where the hell is law and order, Mr. Harper? You change the regulation, the regulatory process, and allow the industry to cause these 21 deaths. You are responsible. And nobody said that you killed 21 people. You are a murderer, Mr. Harper, and your government. Why not? The only person that talked about this was Stephen Dion during the election in October of 2008, and the media treat him as if he is crazy to raise this issue. When Clements, Minister of Health, was in Denver, there were other ministers, 2 other ministers of Harper government were with him. It was Mr. Van Loan and another one, I forgot his name right now. But there was also lobbyists from the industry. One of the names jumped at me. The name of the lobbyist, he was the lobbyist for government affairs, vice president for government affairs of Nexen Oil. His name was Mr. Dwayne Lingenfelter. Dwayne Lingenfelter in past was an NDP MLA.
So now we see that all the parties are kind of the same. So here's a former NDP MLA with Mr. Clements lobbying for the tar sands.
And he was also NDP Premier Calvert of Saskatchewan, deputy premier.
So he was the deputy premier of the Saskatchewan government.
And so he was pushing for tar sand and saying this has to happen. We have no choices. Obama has no choices. But then in 2009, less than a year later, in June of 2009, Mr. Lingenfelter became the leader of NDP in Saskatchewan. And he was the leader of NDP until 2011 defeat. He lost his own seat. So the issue is this, that we have in NDP that claiming that they are environmentally concerned about this issue, they don't like dirty oil, they don't like pipelines, is all baloney. They support the pipeline for Kinder Morgan, they support the East pipeline to go to Eastern Canada. Mr. Gary Doer,
That's right.
the NDP premier, long-time NDP premier of the Manitoba, become Harper ambassador to Washington, and his main job is lobbying for oil tar sand industry.
That's right. I mean, I'm from Winnipeg, so I know Gary Doer. He was the premier of Manitoba for a long time. And all of a sudden, there was a story, he's decided, I think for family reasons, to step out of politics. So he resigns, and like literally a week later, Stephen Harper makes the former premier of Manitoba, NDP premier, Canada's ambassador to the United States. I mean, how...
You have to have lots of confidence on him, and he become the number 1 lobbyist for tar sand industry. Here in British Columbia, we had a premier called Dan Miller. He is now lobbying for the oil industry, for tanker traffics and opening of the West Coast to the tanker traffics, for the pipeline.
That's right. Dan Miller was the premier. He was the leader of the NDP for a short time when the party was kind of collapsing after Mike Harcourt. So he became premier for a while.
And also between Ojal Dosanjh and Glenn Clark, he was again premier at that time. So we see that also Mr. Mulcair, for example, he's stopping any candidates that talk about any candidate that talk about justice for Palestinian are not allowed to run for NDP. Why not?
So here's the quote from a former NDP candidate. The quote, unfortunately, is true. One could argue that Israel's intention was always to ethnically cleanse the region. There are direct quotations proving this to be the case. A minority of Palestinians are bombing buses in response to what appears to be a calculated effort to commit a war crime. I mean, he had made that statement, and because of that, the NDP removed him. And I understand because the media plays a role, they will destroy the NDP for it. But
There is
we've only got a minute left.
NDP in Halifax was not allowed. In Edmonton, in Clyde River, in Nunavut, were not allowed because they said Palestinians are human beings too. So when you look at all this, for any progressive person, anybody that want to turn around the direction that our country is going and being devastated and become emptied, making it empty from inside, we should look at around. And in British Columbia and in southern Vancouver Island, the best choice is the Green. And there is 4 capable Green women are running, and I really hope that people vote for these Green candidates, because Elizabeth May has shown in last 4 years her action has been she has been exemplary. So I hope people consider the 4 Green.
Thank you, Mehdi Najari, and thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, September the 1st. I'd like to thank again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff. Our guest in this segment is Werner Simbeck. Werner, thanks for coming on. We're going to be talking about climate change. I think we can certainly say that things are getting crazier in terms of the weather. The forest fires are everywhere. I was in Vancouver this past weekend. And just on the periphery, I mean, I was lucky where I was. We didn't lose power. A huge amount of rain, a lot of wind, following months of drought. And I noticed the media in Vancouver, the big media, was blaming, they weren't saying, folks, we have to drive less or we're all going to be dead because of climate change. They were focusing a lot of public anger at BC Hydro because their website was down.
Right,
So
they couldn't get through to 911.
Yeah, and they couldn't get through to 911.
That's right.
And those are problems for people. But they never mentioned once, like, we have to change what we're doing or we're going to kill ourselves.
Well, the mayor was briefly interviewed. I did see a quick a news clip of him, the mayor of Vancouver, and he did mention that this is going to be the future. We're going to see more severe weather events. So he was able to sort of add that to the mix, but of course he gets drowned out by all these other reports and all these other messages of citizens complaining about BC Hydro not responding quickly
Well, it
enough.
wasn't really the citizens complaining. I didn't hear that. It was the media saying that people were complaining about this. I only heard one citizen, and she was quite reasonable.
Okay, well, I did. Yeah. Sorry, not to disagree, but I did see one older gentleman who couldn't get into his house because a tree was hovering over it, you know, suspended by power lines, and they couldn't get enough people there to turn the power off and then get the tree service to cut the trees down. And then anyway, so the fire department just basically said you can't go in your house. He was upset about that. Understandable. There were a lot of people that were upset.
Oh, of course.
And scared, and you know, you totally understand
And this is the new normal.
And that's what the mayor of Vancouver was saying, and I totally agree with him. This is something that we're going to see more of, unfortunately. We're going to see more extreme weather events, things that are just unusual. You'll either see unusually heavy rains, unusual droughts, unusual windstorms. That's going to be the new normal. You know, so we're going to see unusual events all the time moving forward, and it's never going to become really the way it was. And that's, if you believe the scientists who sort of study this, they've been predicting this since the 80s, really.
Well, you know, we've got a few things to talk about, but maybe we should get to the most important thing, which is, what do we do now?
What do we do now? Well, in Canada in particular, we have a federal election going on. So I think it's really important to get people that you may know have never voted or haven't voted in the last federal election, or who are just totally turned off politics, trying to engage them, trying to discuss with them some of the important issues like climate change, because that's really going to be important for the future generation. So if anyone who has children, you know, who hasn't been bothering to vote, they should really start to pay attention to what the candidates are saying. I mean, the previous guest you just had on was endorsing Elizabeth May, somebody I would endorse as well, but that's not the only one that's out there. And Elizabeth May with the Green Party is not going to win the federal election, unfortunately. So we have to look at the other candidates. And really what the biggest concern is of the federal election coming up is that we have a strong 3-leader race, really. We have the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives. And because we have a 3-horse race, if you want to call it that, chances are the Conservatives could become a minority government again. Even worst case could be another majority. Doesn't sound likely, but a minority is possible. And I think really we want to avoid that at all costs. You know, a minority Liberal or NDP would be okay with me any day.
So in terms of just climate change, you're happy with minority Liberal, minority NDP,
Yes.
majority Liberal?
Well, even that would be okay.
Majority NDP?
Well, I would, again, personal preferences. I think the Harper government and the Conservatives themselves, they just, they kind of like made a contract with the devil, which is the oil industry, and because they relied on a lot of funding that came from that sector, and assuming that sector is going to drive the Canadian economy forward, they basically put all their eggs in that one basket. Now, recently, that kind of has fallen through because the oil price has gone down toilet, down to $40 a barrel. That hasn't been good for the Alberta economy. And if you saw that news clips yesterday from the finance minister of Alberta, which is now NDP, I mean, he clearly pointed out, we're in the hole. We're $6 billion in the hole. And, that was cut out of the mainstream media, actually, because I happened to listen to it on CBC radio. They actually played him discussing why it is that they're in the hole. They cut that out in the actual on CBC The National. Yeah. Well, they explained clearly that we had in Alberta we had conservative governments over many years now, and they just have mismanaged the oil sector. They have
that's
not
a polite way of putting it. Mismanaged.
Well, yeah, they're directly.
This was a massive giveaway and poisoning.
Absolutely,
yeah. Alberta.
So basically, I think they estimate, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it is understandable that billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars have been wasted, not collected, being given to the industry by really low royalties in form of really low royalties. So they never could really save any money for a rainy day like what we have right now. So, and the thing, this is I already suspected, once the world will realize that we can't burn all the oil that's in the ground, which is what the scientists have been saying, that means the oil in the tar sands will not become mineable. It will be financially impossible.
Thank goodness for that.
And who's going to clean it up? Who is going to clean up this
Nobody.
mess?
It's impossible to clean up.
And that's why I'm saying the governments have totally failed, because there should have been a fund put aside for exactly this purpose, to clean it up.
But no matter how much money you put aside, you can't clean it up. I mean, it's poisoned for...
I suppose forever, right?
Yeah.
For a long time anyways. And that's the thing. I mean, we have basically, it flows into the Athabasca River flows into the Mackenzie watershed. And I think I have that right. But it's one of the biggest freshwater watersheds in the world that we have polluted.
Poisoned. And then into the ocean and then around
into the Alaska
world.
Ocean.
Yeah. And I guess we've got to move to renewables. We've certainly got to consume less and do less.
Absolutely.
We've got to move away from the cars. To me, the car is the number one disaster. I can't think of a bigger disaster environmentally than the car.
Well, obviously, things have to, when it comes to transportation, there has to be a lot more that we need to do in order to allow public transit to flourish. And the way you do this, you tax heavily on gasoline or oil, right? To pay for that, to pay for the infrastructure that we need. We basically gave away the oil and the natural resources of Canada. We should have charged higher royalties, which we didn't do. So we mismanaged that already. So like the horse is already out of the barn, now it's going to become more painful to basically collect all those revenues in form of higher taxation. That's the only way to get that money. And of course, to shift the economy from...
but we can higher tax the corporations. They've got so much money that there's lots of money to pay for what we have to do. We just have to take it from the people who have stolen it from us.
That's right. So, but this is going to become a bit of a battle, as you can imagine, right? Because, all the big banks have profited really well. They have money they should be giving back to the economy, right? In terms of forms of higher taxation. There need to be stricter rules of how many fees they can charge us, the customer, right? Because otherwise they would just pass it on to us.
Few of them should probably be up on charges.
I suppose so. But anyway, so there needs to be a big shift. The economy needs to shift from the status quo of what we've had, which hasn't been working. We've produced a lot of greenhouse gas emissions as a result. We need to shift to green renewables industries. So solar, photovoltaic, geothermal, wind energy. There was just a headline, I just caught it just before I came here. Copenhagen again was in the news. Not Copenhagen, sorry, Denmark. Denmark was in the news. They've invested a lot of money into renewables, particularly wind farms. And they produced 140% again of their energy needs, so 40% surplus. So they're able to sell that surplus to their neighboring countries. They're able to produce more energy in form of renewables than they actually need. Right? And it's a little small country. I think Canada can easily do that too, if we're clever about it, right? If we invest in the right infrastructure projects.
But somehow, if we don't reduce, everybody, including Denmark, reduce the use of the car and many other things as well.
And many other things. The airplane would be another one, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, you know, living simpler doesn't mean you live less happy.
No, I think it means you live more happy.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
We need to actually attach happiness as part of an economic gauge.
Yeah.
You know, we measure GDP, gross national product, in forms of dollars, but happiness doesn't get measured. And that should really be quality of life. So that's where transit would come in. You know, people less spending time in their cars and spending more time in public transit would alleviate stress, and they become happier.
Yeah. And then if you're talking public transit, it's got to be safe, comfortable, quiet, pleasant, convenient.
All you have to do is look to Europe.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look to Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, they have beautiful examples of how it works.
Yeah. And of course that means a better society in general.
Yes.
You know, and that's really what it's all about. So what you're talking about, what we're talking about, isn't going to cost us.
It's a shift.
It's going to benefit us.
Yeah.
And that's what Stéphane Dion said years
wanted
ago.
to do.
A green shift.
Yeah, I was a big
and
fan
look how
of
they
his.
destroyed him. I was a fan too.
Yeah. It was really sad to see how they destroyed that message, and it was never clearly explained, in the media. So the media has a big.
It was clearly explained. The media did not. They were out to get Stéphane Dion, and they got him. And we lost. We Canadians lost.
Yeah.
A lot of us fell for it.
Yeah.
And but it was all a story, a corporate story, because he was talking about many of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, so I hope people will go out and vote, organize, help, whoever party you support. But obviously, there's a lot of good ideas out there. Let's just get active, get involved, get educated, and get out the vote. That's the most important thing.
Werner, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 3 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Jon Del Sol. We're going to be talking about direct democracy. But just before that, I heard today that there are debates, election debates taking place here in the city. One is being sponsored by a group called BC Sustainable Energy Association. I understand they're calling it an all-candidates debate, but not all candidates are being invited to speak. And I mean, if you're going to say, I think this happens a fair bit. If you're going to have an all-candidates debate, all candidates must be allowed to speak. This is, intolerable. So I hope it doesn't happen anywhere else, including with this particular debate. Jon, your issue is direct democracy. Welcome.
Thank you.
A very important issue. We don't have much of it in Canada. Maybe you can just start by explaining what is direct democracy.
Well, direct democracy is very self-explanatory by itself. And instead of having representative democracy, which means we give our power to a representative to make the decisions for us, and direct democracy, the citizens, vote on referendums for legislation. So the citizens become the legislators. The politicians become only executive administrators, managers, bureaucrats that will manage the different ministries. So direct democracy doesn't really exist in any country right now in the world, but there is more steps towards direct democracy in Switzerland and Iceland, countries where they use a lot more referendums plebiscites, polls. So I wrote a little poem.
A
last
poem.
night.
Oh, okay.
I was inspired, and the Spirit came to me and said, on elections day, we give away our power of legislation to a leader representation, which is basically the same thing that I just explained. Second verse, if we the people propose insights, BC elections, do plebiscites. So
Not bad.
what it means is that if we are ready to participate in initiatives and the political debate, then we have the system on the electoral agencies of the government, like in BC elections or in Canada elections, which is another office perhaps in Ottawa. But they have the technology and the funding to develop a program, a computerized program where people can access from all over the country and put their insights. So that's what it means here when the Spirit guided me to say, if we, the people, propose insights, in this case as BC elections, do plebiscites, because I was editing a program on LNG. The MLAs gather here in Victoria to
Well, let's just talk about that LNG. So this is the agreement that Christy Clark signed with Petronas. Now, to me, that was a massive giveaway, not only of our wealth, but to allow the oil and gas industry to poison BC on top of it. I mean, that, to me, that's what that issue was all about. The government voted to allow this to proceed. I don't think the people of BC wanted this, but we have no voice because there is no direct democracy. And I think what we've got to have at all levels of government is a way so that when there is broad public opposition to anything that any level of government is doing, we should have the ability to relatively easy trigger a vote. And otherwise, we allow corrupt politicians to rule us, and which, as we can see, is very dangerous environmentally, economically, and socially.
Mm-hmm. And we do that every time we go to the electoral box and put our ballot in. We're in fact given legal authority to the majority government right now in BC to do whatever they want. So the discussion is just theater, because in fact if they have majority, they're going to do whatever they're proposing to do. It doesn't matter that the NDPs would argue back and forth because they don't have a majority. So when we go to the ballot box and put our vote in the ballot box, that's the minute our democracy is finished. We have no more legal right to do anything about it for the next 4 years. When we go and do the same thing again, we put our power to legislate, we give it to them. And then we have 4 years to complain when we don't like it. So the third part of this poem, the third part of this poem is a question actually to us, to all the voters, because now we're focused on the October 19th federal election, not so much in the provincial, busy elections or busy dealings and governance. But this is in regards to the October 19th, and is questioning and says, are you ready to initiate by referendum to legislate? It's just a rhyme.
Yes. Are you ready to initiate by referendum to legislate?
Because if we are ready, when we're ready, if we are in my lifetime, when we're ready to legislate, first ready to initiate, because we need an initiative. We need to frame the legislation, and then we can discuss it, and then we can vote on it, and it's legislated by referendum.
Okay. Now, do you think most people in, let's say, British Columbia, just to keep it fairly small, want direct democracy?
That's the question.
That is yeah.
I was.
I've spoken to people who I thought would be all for direct democracy, which is really just if the politicians are doing something we don't want, we can stop them. And if they're not doing something we do want,
Yeah.
we can make them do it. And yet when I speak to people about direct democracy, I don't get as positive a response as I would have hoped for.
Yeah.
People are afraid of direct democracy.
Well, some politicians are afraid of direct democracy, and I think some voters are afraid of having to participate because it consumes some time. It demands reading, studying the issue to have an opinion, and a lot of people don't want to give that time. They're too busy making money, working, and they don't have the time to get involved in politics. They just trust the politician to make the right decision.
Are we that stupid?
That,
We trust the
that's-
politicians? I can't believe it.
That's the question
Yeah.
that the poem is saying.
So
Are you
how do we
ready?
take those first few steps? I mean, what can we do? Because I believe in direct democracy. I don't want direct democracy on what color they're going to paint, you know, the council room at City Hall, but on important issues, we've got to have the power. The public, the citizens have to have the power. So how do we begin? I guess the first thing is discussion and education and information.
Yeah, well, that's what we need. And I think the first thing, as you say, is information, is citizens forums. And this is a forum, it's a cyber forum, it's a television forum, could be in-person meetings on churches or in community centers. We need those forums, we need that information. Second, we need also people to protest against what they don't agree with the government. We need public debates, because in those protests and debates, you find that others learn about the issue. They learn that, oh, I didn't know there was something wrong with it. So third, we need candidates to promise. The candidates on October 19 need to promise to legislate initiative and referendum. In other words, if a candidate does not give me that right, or does not promise that he or she will legislate initiative and referendum, therefore I will not vote for that candidate.
So you have nobody to vote for.
Well, I haven't talked to them yet. Next week I'm going to be talking here with some candidates. But I'm hoping that someone will say yes, because I need that. I need to participate. I don't want to give my power to somebody else to do the right or wrong decision. I want to use my own ability to make decisions. So
okay.
the last one, let me just finish here with citizens' desire to participate on direct democracy is the most eminent thing. Because if people understand it but are not willing to demand this from the candidates, we lose this unique opportunity on October 19th of saying, I'll give you my vote if you give me the ability to post initiatives and to count my vote in referendums. If we don't demand that, we won't get it. And another 4 years will go for us to complain.
Now, direct democracy, as you said, Switzerland is probably the country that uses direct democracy the most, and I think most people would think that Switzerland, you know, in many ways is, you know, not a bad country. In the United States, states have used direct democracy referendums to legalize marijuana because that's what the public has wanted. And also there's different ways of doing it. You can have direct democracy hard, where there's a vote and whatever that vote is, that's the end, and the government has to do it. Or there are softer ways of doing it where the public votes and then it goes to the government and they can discuss it and bring out another idea. There's different ways of doing it. But I think in essence, it's very important that we begin to move towards more. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks very much. A very important issue. It's something we should be discussing, especially at election time. Direct democracy. Thanks for watching this segment. Welcome back. The last segment of Citizens Forum is going to be a video filmed by Linda Tafts and talking about the situation in Palestine.
So, as Don said, my name is Sahar, and as you've had a chance to see quite a lot of the occupation, I fortunately don't have to talk about that at all. And I'll try to give you a little bit of the other side of that picture in the sense of the militarism in Israeli society and how it affects the occupation, how it kind of comes out of it. So I was born here, born and raised in Jerusalem. You've probably noticed that Jerusalem is not one city, although Israel likes to say it is. I would argue that there are probably at least 3 cities here. There's the Palestinian East Jerusalem, there's the Jewish Orthodox part of the city, and then there's the Jewish non-Orthodox part of the city. And they have different public transportation systems, different school systems, different languages in many cases. So everything that I can say about growing up in Jerusalem, I'm actually only talking about a very small part of Jerusalem, which is the part of Jerusalem that's really under complete Israeli control, including the education system. The Orthodox, for that matter, don't study in the same education system that we do. So everything I will say about education is only true for the Zionist governmental education system. So I think that when you kind of try to look at Israeli education, there are 2 lines that are really important when we talk about militarism. The first one is, what does militarism actually look like on a daily basis? And then the second one is the whole concept of fear and how that fits into militarism. And when we talk about militarization, it starts literally from the day you kind of step out of your house. So you've walked around Jerusalem a bit. Have you walked around West Jerusalem at all?
No.
Not at all.
Just drove through a corner of it.
Okay, so if you ever do get a chance, you walk 10 meters from here, and one of the first things that you'd notice is the amount of guns on the streets. Now, this is obviously also true in the occupied territories, but those are soldiers on uniform, on duty. When you walk here, could either be soldiers on duty or it can be soldiers on vacation. It just seems very normal. We don't see those kind of things. And for people coming from the outside, that's usually kind of scary. One of the things that's important to understand about Israelis is that we don't see them. They're completely transparent as far as we're concerned, because we're so used to seeing them everywhere. There's this sheet of paper that I love to show that was given to kindergarten kids to teach them how to count. So on the one side, you have the numbers from 1 to 10, and on the other side, you have symbols. So you're supposed to connect 2 symbols to the number 2. Only in that piece of paper, the symbols that were chosen were tanks and airplanes and the symbol of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And the same piece of paper had an olive branch, a dove, Knesset, our parliament, the symbol of Israel, the flag of Israel, and the kind of message that comes out of something like that obviously a 3-year-old doesn't really understand the message that comes out of it, right? He's just trying to connect the dots. But what that represents for Israelis is Israel. That's what Israel is. It's institutions, it's peace, we all want peace obviously, and it's the military, and that's part of creating an identity in many ways. And that's just one of many examples of how that's done. So you, in many ways, very much personalize this idea of not only joining the army, but also possibly dying as part of that service from a very, very young age. By the time we get to high school, it becomes even more established. So you have soldiers coming in and out of classrooms explaining about the different units. It's considered preparation for military service. You have a soldier that's responsible for every year group. So we had our very nice guy who would just come in and make sure that everyone knows where they're going in the army, and if they have any questions, he can explain about them. And you go out to military camps for them to try to convince you to go to this unit or the other. It's literally it's a little bit like a college fair, just with different units. And they try to convince you, we want you. And then in the 11th grade, there's a week of basic training. So you go out with school, it's part of school activity, to a military base, and you learn how to shoot, and you wear a uniform, and you take orders. And it's part of school activity, and it's fun, it's with your friends. And this whole thing leads up to the fact that when you're supposed to be conscripted at the age of 18, and nobody's ever, it's the law, right? Nobody's ever going to ask you, do you want to serve in the army? When you're expected to be conscripted, you've never asked yourself that question. You've never questioned the idea of military service because you had no reason to. Just to be clear that this is not just a perspective about what the education system does, officially that's part of the goals of the education system, is to prepare for military service. It's in the written goals since 1951 when they were written to today. That's probably the one goal that hasn't changed throughout time. There's this really nice photo of the head of the South District of the Ministry of Education and the head of the South District of the Israeli military having this farewell party when this general was retiring. And the main thing about it, the way that the Ministry of Education published that photo on their Facebook page, was the Ministry of Education is thanking this general for years of cooperation. So the idea that there's years of cooperation is clear, and it's something that we're very happy to be proud about. And the same photo, the general was giving this lady from the Ministry of Education a goodbye gift. And that kind of leads me to that other narrative, because what he gave her was a framed picture with 3 photos in it. The first photo, it's this carving of the Jewish people taking out the relics from the Second Temple when the Romans are destroying it. So it's like this, religious, historical persecution of Jews. The second picture is the picture of the little kid from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the one surrendering. And then the third picture is the paratroopers on the Wailing Wall in '67 when they liberated it. And that, in many ways, is kind of a snapshot of the historical narrative that we're taught, which is that everyone has always tried to kill Jews. It's a religious fact, it's a historical fact, and then the Holocaust is obviously the strongest example of that. And then what we have now is the response to that. It's the strong enough army to reoccupy Jerusalem, to liberate the Wailing Wall, and that's kind of the narrative that we come out with. The other side of it is, again, understanding who's actually profiting out of this. And then we have to go back to these very nice generals. And probably the best example for this is Barak, our ex-chief of staff, Minister of Defense, Prime Minister, who it's just a cute example. So when he was Minister of Defense in the previous government, he was in the process of privatizing IMI, Israeli military industry. It's the biggest Israeli military industry company in Israel. He was in the process of privatizing it. He thought he was about to retire. He paused, and he was privatizing it. And then political things changed, so he didn't retire. So he paused the privatization until he retired. Retired, it's being privatized now, and he is in the bid together with another business colleague to buy it. Okay, so I mean, it's pretty much out there. There's a whole lot of people, most of them ex-generals, who have the in the military. So they have the expertise, they have the connections, they have the effect that they have on the political system is extremely strong, and they can make a huge economic profit out of that. Today, 75 to 80% of Israel's military industry is for export. It's not about defense of Israel. It's about the bottom line. Israel today is in the top 10 biggest weapons exporters in the world. It's the #1 weapon exporter per capita in the world. It's now the #1 drone exporter in the world. And we're talking about a huge, huge industry, which also has, Israel is the, I think, 4th biggest military spender in percentage of GDP, 6.2% of our GDP, something like that. So it's a lot of spending, but mostly it's just a lot of money coming in. And the reason that Israel can do that is that we can prove our weapons work, unlike a lot of other countries, because they're combat proven. I don't know how many of you in your spare time look at commercials for weapons. I assume not many. I do. But you'll actually see in posters, so you'll have like a poster for a drone, and I'm not kidding, you have posters for drones, and it has a stamp that says battle proven. That's how you market things. And so in the last attack on Gaza, there were over 20 different weapon systems, including missiles, new drones, protective systems, a lot of different things that had their first operational debut during the summer and are now being sold in September. So a month, not even a month after the operation ended, there was a huge military expo of drones near the airport. That's what they sell. And countries are very happy to buy that. And it's important to say that countries, especially the US, and I'm sure this is also true of the UK, but most of the examples I know are from the US, are also happy to use that angle of Israel. I just want to make the point, this is a very two-sided game. So, for instance, I don't know how many of you know the F-35 project?
No.
The Americans do. And the Canadians, great. So the F-35 project is supposed to be the last fighter jet, or the last manned fighter jet. It's a very high-tech fighter jet. It's supposed to be stealth. It's not, but that's a different issue. And it's a $1.5 trillion project. Okay, it's spent over 50 years, but it's a $1.5 trillion project. That's in now, I think it's 15th year or so. This plane has had over 360 malfunctions. It's extremely expensive, and there's absolutely no operational use of it. The world is moving to drones. Nobody wants fighter jets anymore. It's a complete waste of money, but too big to fail. Way too many contracts already signed. You can't get out of it. So what does the US do? Nobody wants to buy this. Literally no country in the world was willing to buy this. So the US literally forced Israel to buy with US military aid. I don't know how much you know about the US military aid. It's $3.1 billion a year to Israel. It's the biggest aid recipient. 75% of that has to be bought back in the US. So actually it's a very nice subsidy from Congress to its own arms industry. Israel just happens to get the weapons in the way. Specifically, Israel didn't want to use that money on the F-35 because we really didn't want it. But the US threatened them to stop, to help with what's called the strategic advantage of the army. Mainly, the US was saying, we can't guarantee that we'll give you high-tech weapons if you don't buy this plane. And now Israel has bought it, and since Israel has bought it, other countries are starting to buy it. Because if the military in Israel has it, we're going to see what it does. It has to be good. These guys know what they're doing. So this is a little bit about the profit side of how this whole system works. But if you want Israelis to never question that, to never think about that, one of the best things you can possibly do is, make them join you. Today, if you criticize the Israeli military, if you criticize the occupation, you're criticizing yourself, what you did as an 18-year-old kid, what your parents did, what your siblings do, what your best friend is doing. You can't do that. It's almost a psychological mechanism that prevents us from being able to actually criticize what's happening around us because we're doing it.
Thanks for watching this segment.